Welcome to our Sustainably Wed Head Table series. In this series, we are talking about how to make the wedding and event industry more sustainable. And today we're going to be talking about how to build a more diverse, inclusive, and intersectional environmental movement within our industry. I think our wedding industry has not typically been known as a particularly inclusive or safe industry for all vendors or for all clients. And as we've talked about in some of our other episodes, a sustainable industry isn't just one with a low carbon footprint. That's good, but a sustainable industry really is one that takes the protection of people and the planet into account. One that really recognizes that environmental and social justice are intertwined. And so we're going to talk about how we can acknowledge that relationship today, and how we can, if I can borrow a phrase from Less Stuff, More Meaning, use weddings and be activists in a really joy-filled or love-filled way. So before we begin, I do want to acknowledge that we are on the traditional territories of the Coast Salish people, the Lekwungen-speaking peoples, and the WSÁNEĆ people here at the Beach House. The Beach House is this great venue that we're at today. It's an awesome wedding venue, as well as a restaurant and great event space, and we're really happy to be here. Speaking of happy to be here, I'm so happy to be here with everybody around the table. We have got a great panel today. I am so happy, Trenton and Jamison, that you are here today. Trenton and Jamison run this incredible program called the Special Bird Service, which I'm going to ask you more about in a moment. So we'll talk more about that in a moment. But Trenton, you are a non-practicing lawyer, and Jamison, you work with the Victoria Immigrant Refugee Society. So we've got a lot of ground we can cover here, and we're going to cover it all today, which is awesome. Now, last but not least, we also have Chrisanne, or Charlie Lake, who is a wedding officiant and our co-host for this series. Charlie has this incredible wealth of knowledge that is not just from being a wedding officiant, but also working with humanitarian organizations, environmental NGOs, including Habitat for Humanity, Surfrider. You work with the University of Victoria. It's incredible. We're so happy to have you here.
Thank you.
So thank you everybody for being here. Let's talk about making our industry better. Well, I kind of made it through. All right.
That was awesome.
Okay. So, Trenton and Jamison, I want to start this conversation by asking you about the Special Bird Service. This is such a cool program, and I wonder if you can start by telling us just a little bit about this program and how it came to be.
Hello, my name's Trenton. We started Special Bird Service about 2 years ago now. Special Bird Service is a registered nonprofit society in BC. And essentially what we are is an outdoor educational advocacy group and community building initiative for marginalized communities in the outdoors. Jamison and I and about maybe 12 or 13 other people founded this organization as a way to feel more interconnected with the land and the people and the critters and creatures around us.
Amazing.
Thanks.
So cool. Now, why bird watching?
I feel like I always thought bird watching was something that you really needed to know the names of stuff. And you needed to know the scientific, identifying the calls and knowing the exact names with each other. And I think we realized with bird watching is that growing up on a bog here on the Lekwungen territory, bird watching was literally waking us up in the morning, hearing bird calls outside and just actually living in harmony with the environment and the birds around us. And so as we were focusing on building community and being outdoors, we realized bird watching is something that we've been doing all of our lives. We just haven't had the words to put to it yet. So actually learning about bird watching with people that are amateur ornithologists, actual bird watchers here, there actually is already a huge community of BIPOC bird watchers here in the Lekwungen territory. And so bird watching and community building really was just a huge way for this to go hand in hand.
That's so cool. I love that. Yeah. Now, bringing together BIPOC individuals for the Special Bird Service is I think such a cool way to connect this community to nature. It is also a really unique program. And can you tell me why it is unique and why there was this need in the community for this program?
For sure. I think when a lot of people hear about bird watching or think about bird watching, they think of people in safari gear who are elderly, who have these, 10-foot lenses and, massive safari hats and stuff like that. And, there's a population of people that look like us who, wear streetwear clothing or, other like stuff like New Balances or, random things like that. That there's a whole different, just like there's a whole different variety of people in the world, there's a whole different variety of birders. Our mother likes to say that I have something called contrarian disease, where I just kind of do stuff because people say you shouldn't or can't or something like that. And that's kind of like part of the reason why we started this, was it just challenges stereotypes. We want to like reinforce positive generalizations. We don't want to reinforce negative stereotypes, and also we want to challenge the status quo. Like, just because somebody says, I shouldn't be birding or something like that doesn't mean I shouldn't. Like, we've had experiences where we've been out on walks and people ask us why we're doing this, and we'll say, oh, we're just enjoying the birds, something like that. And people have literally been like, it's January, there's no birds here. And we're like, what? Like, we've literally seen about 20 different species in the past hour, and you're trying to tell us that there's no birds here? Like, it's interesting to see people's preconceptions about young people, about birding, about people of color, about people with different demographics like sexuality, race, age, background, and just kind of turn those on their heads for the sake of asking the question.
Yeah, for sure. That's so cool. Well, and I mean, thinking about stereotypes, I think from what I understand, there are many systemic reasons why people of color are not traditionally in these outdoor activities and not seen in camping ads or hiking promotional materials and that kind of thing, and so images and advertising have been a problem in the past. And I wonder if you can speak a little bit to that sort of absence of people of color in that marketing material, and have you seen any change in that over the past couple of years?
Yeah, definitely. There's been a pull in the last few years to actually making a change in representation, and I think there's been a lot of performative shifts as well in the recent years, and we're going to keep seeing that, as that's kind of part of the human condition, I think. And still, the amount of meaningful representation that we've been seeing, not only through this group, but being connected with Lekwungen people here and the Husainich First Nations as well. One of the young matriarchs from Husainich, Tiffany Joseph, has taken us out on walks and actually teaching us about the winged nation and how that's connected with the land. And so I think knowing who's out there and seeing, on posters is one thing, actually, where you can see yourself represented in the advertising. That's a first step for sure. And I think when we talk about community building, it's actually it's relationship building with one another, and it's meaningful representation. So when we're posting stuff about oh, look how diverse the birding industry actually is, that's a result of walking the talk every step of the way and upholding Indigenous sovereignty too, in all that we do. And I think I've learned a lot from that too, because growing up, I was in science class, it was predominantly old white dudes that were teaching us about birding or teaching us about the land and teaching us about the medicines of the land, but it was never that language, right? It was always really disconnected, Latin terms,
yeah, right.
Which are also hilarious. The Latin name for owl is hilarious. I think it's Bubo virginatus or something like that, which is just hilarious. So whoever's coming up for those names is
whack.
Yeah, scientific names for birds in general are there's quite a range of inappropriate names that we might have to blur on this or beat out on this.
Not only that, a lot of birds, or just taxonomy in general, with labeling things in Latin, has a really deep tie to racist colonizers and stuff like that across the board. So there's a shift that needs to be made there as well. Yeah. And that's what we're talking about, the sort of intersectionality of it all and how it all ties together. We've compartmentalized a lot of these things as humans into nice little boxes and sectors of industry, but in reality, like we've mentioned, the intersectional reality of it all is everything is intertwined and inextricably linked.
Absolutely. Well, and that is a very good link into talking about the wedding industry, because as you say, we tend to see these industries as separate, and particularly in the wedding industry, we are kind of in our own bubble, and within that we're siloed even further into caterers and hair and makeup artists and all these kind of things. We all do our own little part, And so it's very easy for us within this industry not to see what else is going on. But let's talk about the wedding industry more broadly, Chris-Anne, because I think there is something to be said here. When we're talking about systemic problems, we're talking about a lack of representation. The wedding industry is very much guilty of many of these things. Can you tell us, kind of broad strokes, how has the wedding industry historically excluded people? And again, are we seeing any shifts there?
How much time do we have? Well, I think historically and traditionally, I'll start by saying historically, it was a male business for men. Men and women were viewed as property, so when they were shifted, even up till I've been doing this going on 17 years now, and when I started doing it, we were still saying in ceremony, who gives this woman to be with this man? And the father would stand up and say, I do. And so there was this expectation for the woman to shift from a male protection to another male protection and to take on their name. And so not only did women they weren't able to have a say in marriage, let alone the planning of their marriage. So that historically has been a huge thing. And I think not just the patriarchy, but the traditionally to do with religion too, and what that looks like as far as women being subservient, and their role was to predominantly serve and respect their male protector. But not just within women, interracial marriage, like that was illegal well into the 20th century. So having folks who wanted to marry, they were excluded from traditional legal marriage. And then same-sex marriage, that was, a couple months ago when Biden and the states signed the Marriage Act. And so that is mind-boggling that we may have some security, myself identifying as queer, have some security now, but that's just here in North America. And there's always going to be folks that are still going to stand up against that. And so I think one of the things right now is for couples and vendors within our industry is to figure out our place within the privilege of it. And because I often come across couples who and I think this is natural, it's no fault of anyone, but to say, this is my right, it is a rite of passage, right? So when they come to the day, they're like, this is my right, I'm gonna do it my way or the highway. And but I think just again, we've talked a lot about finding our place within a larger system. So we're not just, we're tied, everything is interconnected. And so especially to do with intersectionality and justice, I think finding out, what privileges we have that aren't afforded to everyone around the world. It's still illegal for same-sex couples to be married and such. So, I think just with empathy and some compassion, I think, choosing to not just be an ally, but just really having that in mind and knowing where to help would be a huge thing.
Absolutely. Well, and I think it's important to note too that we are seeing a few groups within the wedding industry who are making a difference in this area. We have a group in the Pacific Northwest, I've written down here, called Vendors of Color, who support and uplift wedding vendors of color in the Pacific Northwest. There's Altered, which is an incredible conference and space for wedding vendors who want to change the wedding industry. They're also based in Portland, but they've got an incredible number of online resources. Equally Wed is a great resource as well that offers training and certification for wedding vendors. And the Inclusive Wedding Alliance, there are some great resources that we can take part in. With those resources in mind, do you think the wedding industry is moving in a positive direction, and is that enough? Or do we still have a long way to go? As you mentioned, like this is not history. This is happening today, right? Mm-hmm. So. Mm-hmm.
I do think we've made some advances in this. I think, especially in pockets of different places, we have for sure. And I also think there is so much more work to do. I've taken part in a lot of those organizations. They have so many good offerings. I've done workshops, and I've met so many interesting folks from all around North America, and just finding women of color who are doing amazing things. I follow an amazing woman down in New Orleans who's an officiant, and she posts the most amazing things, and I just share all of her content because I think that is a place where we can start for sure. But yeah, finding folks who are around, who are doing the work, and learning from them and posturing ourselves in the position. Me as a white person, how can I learn from people of color? And maybe you as a straight identifying person, how could you learn from a queer person, and so forth. But I do feel like there is so much work to be done still, I think, to do with being an ally, because we still have folks that are refusing to be an ally, and in fact fighting against that and our right to exist and love who we love. So there is a lot of work to be done still, but I think people are stepping out and doing it. And here, even locally, there's so much amazing stuff happening, like with our guests here today. I know there's always this trope of Victoria's so white. And I hear it all the time. I heard it yesterday. And it's not true. It's just there's so many amazing people that are like ingrained in the community and doing amazing, rad things. We just have to find them, get to know them, and promote what they're doing. It's as simple as that. And just really living out that allyship and what that looks like, but from like a genuine point that isn't performative, that is like true relationship.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like working in solidarity and living in solidarity, for sure.
And reciprocity.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I think from our perspective and meeting so many cool people along the way, like Jamison spoke of Tiffany Joseph and Papakia as well, Ashley Cooper. She's a Wasanich land steward and knowledge keeper, and she's just shared so much with us from not only Senchathan, the language of the Wasanich people, for bird names and helping us out with identifying birds and stuff like that, but leading poetry workshops for us and working collaboratively with her, and people like Sarah Jim, and people who are just revitalizing the art, the culture of their First Nations, and just really stewarding the culture and bringing it into the new age. It's like a really privileged spot to be in, to witness these people who are really talented. As well, Chaz Elliott Tomosang, he's a carver and an artist. There's just so many talented people locally, like we're talking about. It's really special.
It's awesome. And I think, being able to uplift those voices so that in industries where those voices could not typically have been heard, there is space for those people, those voices, those conversations. And I think that's, especially in the wedding and event industry where we are at right now, we're kind of at the start of making this industry more sustainable. We're at the start of an environmental movement. So thinking about how we do that really intentionally, really purposefully, and so that we have the right people around the table to do that is so important. And actually that kind of brings me to talking about this intersection between sustainability and social justice. So we've talked a little bit about that, but I want to back up a little bit and just define that term intersectional, because that is a term that gets kind of put out there a lot. So can I ask you both, what does intersectional mean?
Yeah, I think the term was coined by Kimberly Williams Crenshaw, and I think the original intention of from what I understand, is that she's a Black feminist scholar who Black feminist scholars specifically have carried the work of social justice in what's colonially known as North America for the last 100+ years. And so the term was originally intended because white feminists were doing work to uplift white women specifically, and Black men were doing a lot of work to in the area of racial justice, that it was super necessary, and Black women specifically were being left out of the conversation. And Indigenous women too. I think that's really important to name specifically on these lands. And so the term intersectionality was originally created to name that, and also name the intersections that we all live at, because our identity is made up of so many different characteristics, And so that informs how we walk in the world, and as you mentioned, our position in society too. And so when we talk about that, I think it's really important to name that in intersectionality, because it's how we exist in the environment and how we exist in the world too.
I really appreciate that you went like this when you said those intersections, because I watched the TED Talk from Kimberly Crenshaw. She was talking about the race road and the sex road, and then the intersection happened. I was like, oh, intersection. I get it. I see. It was a very visual thing for me. I don't know why I didn't look at it as roads before, but it totally made sense to me as roads. And so I appreciate that you went like that too, because that's literally how I think about it. That's awesome. So I think, there's intersectionality, but more and more often now we are hearing about intersectional environmentalism, and this is a fairly new phrase or new lens or way of looking at things. And I know that the work of Leah Thomas is really important here, particularly coming in the past couple of years after the murder of George Floyd, that she has really been pushing the idea of intersectional environmentalism, and in fact has recently put out a book called The Intersectional Environmentalist that came out last year. I was going to bring it as a prop, but it's on my iPad, so that's kind of dumb to just hold up. Believe me, it's on here. So this work is really important, and it's really cool. So can I ask you then to again define the term? What is intersectional environmentalism?
I think from my perspective, I also like to build on what Jamison said about intersectionality and acknowledging that it's an analytical framework for understanding how different aspects of people's social and political identities combine to create different modes of discrimination, biases, and privilege. And to me, like you mentioned, it's kind of like a lens to look at the world through, realizing that the patriarchal society and the system that we live in today affects everybody at every level in different ways. And it doesn't work for anybody. Right. Like it might uplift white straight men's voices the most, but it doesn't even work for them. And more importantly, it doesn't work for the rest of the people who get left out of that picture. And so intersectional environmentalism, is like a framework to sort of conceptualize how social justice, eco-justice, environmentalism, all of that is intertwined and linked, like you said, with the visual. It's at the crossroads of all of these things. Nothing can be left out because each aspect or sector of various industries or characteristics or phenomenon, all of those add together to create the system that doesn't work for all of us right now today.
Right. Yeah, and I think, when we think about that kind of crossroads thing, we often think about it as just two crossroads, but as you say, it's like 100 roads intersecting at that one point, right? It's not just race, it's not just sex, it's not just gender, it's socioeconomic status. There's so many things that are coming together. And yeah, we need that lens to look through. So, I mean, when we think about it in terms of, say, the wedding and event industry and building a movement that is diverse, is inclusive, and is an environmental movement that uplifts all those voices, I guess we have to consider all of those intersecting roads, right? Which is not easy.
No, it's not. I think the wedding industry, from what I've heard you say and from what my understanding of it, is at a similar place to the outdoor industry right now. It's been commodified. Both have, the outdoors and the wedding industry. Like we don't have to have a massive wedding to be able to love somebody and celebrate that love. Just like you don't need all the best gear to go out and enjoy the outdoors. So there's definitely a link there. And I think when we look at the intersectionality and when we acknowledge it for what it is, that everything is interconnected, we can take the issue holistically and look at it holistically, the entire issue, rather than just trying to administer something to get rid of some of the symptoms. We can look at the root of the issue and not just some of the minor symptoms that affect different people in different spots. We can look at, like I said, the problem holistically and solve the root cause of it.
Right. I think that's a really interesting way of looking at the wedding industry. And I think you're right that we're on kind of a similar track in that commodification. And like, as you said earlier, you don't need a 600 millimeter lens to enjoy birds. You can just enjoy birds. Right, and that goes to many of the things that you've said today in other episodes, Chris-Anne, that you don't need all of the things to have a great wedding. Yeah. And so I mean, you've spoken really well about putting putting your priorities and putting your heart kind of at the center of things. Do you think that's what we need to do as an industry?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Oh, yes. Scaling back on every level and getting to the root of it. And I think on a positive front of that, it would be finding the heart and finding, the intention of the day. And then also with like the problems of the environment and social justice, like getting to the heart of it, which a lot of these issues are systemic. And so getting down there, starting from there, and obviously, not to borrow a phrase, but building back better
right.
from there.
Yeah. Well, and I think, when we are thinking about building back better, how do we ensure that we as a wedding industry or an event industry, how do we ensure that we're doing that in a way that uplifts voices that have traditionally been marginalized, and bring everyone to the table in a really safe and inclusive way?
Mm-hmm. I remember I actually shared something last Pride that was really on my heart, and saying if in the spirit of true allyship, like we should not just be like partnering with organizations or vendors that are visibly like either BIPOC or visibly in other ways and queer and presenting. And I remember thinking, like, we shouldn't just be allies, we should actually be promoting them over our own businesses. And I took a risk by saying that, especially around some of my vendor friends, because I wasn't saying, promote me over you, right. But I was saying, like, really consider this. Like, and you shared my stuff, and you shared that post, and that meant a lot to me. I was like, oh, Paper Heart Films just shared my post, and it got some traction. But yeah, I think that is the least we can do, is not in going beyond being allies and just actually not partnering with, but promoting first. Right. Like there are amazing vendors of color, there are local amazing organizations where people are leading it, and they're marginalized. And so actually putting them first and partnering with them, but again, in this genuine spirit of friendship, and how transformative those relationships can be beyond just like, beyond the industry. Like having relationships that are transformative is what I'm all about in my work in the industry and otherwise.
Awesome. I'm glad we shared your post.
Thank you.
That was probably Chelsea. She does our social media. Yeah. Good on you. Yeah.
Jamison, I was curious if you could relate that to your community around the Sweat Lodge at all.
Definitely. Yeah. I've been invited in recently by a Sartlip elder. His name is Bryan Smith. And it's just, I've learned a lot from him in the way that he is. But an example that of like what the transformative relationship building I think really looks like, that he taught me, is I was in a men's circle the other day, and this engineering firm came in who is wanting to build a new wellness center for the Sartlip First Nation, who is one of the Husainich First Nations. And these two white gentlemen came in and were wanting to know what like wellness means to the group of predominantly Sartlip men who were sitting around the circle. And Fraser went on to talk, and he was just like, your idea of wellness and my idea of wellness are completely different. I'm imagining. And he just went on to say what wellness means to him in community. And he said the amount of people that have come into community and have just wanted to do something for them, like white savior complex, or have just wanted to, attach their name to the Sartlip Nation, is, I can't even imagine how many people have done that, And he invited them. He went on and talked for about 20 minutes of just calling them into what wellness really means. And then he said, we're here every Monday. If you want to actually build a relationship and know what wellness means to us, come and sit in a circle with us. Like, come here and be a part of this men's circle, and come back every week. We're playing pool next Monday. Come play pool with us, And that's like, allyship is one thing. And I think it's like performative allyship is huge in the wedding industry, I'm sure. And it's huge in social justice and all around social media specifically. And like actually showing up with your boots on the ground in community when people invite you in. And that allyship's a starting place for sure. But as you say, Chris-Anne, it's just like actually getting in that next level of being there, showing up, and especially when you're invited in, So we'll see what comes of that. But I mean, I think that also just speaks to the strength and like openness that Fraser has specifically, and also what meaningful relationship building actually looks like.
For sure, that's so cool. And yeah, I mean, I think that touches on something that is important to talk about here is how do we avoid performative allyship here? And you're right. I don't think any industry has avoided performative allyship. And I want to be really mindful, that as a cis straight white man, I need to do the work. That's for sure on me. And I don't want to just ask you both, hey, how do we solve this? But I do want to ask whether you have any advice or ideas from other industries that you've seen to create movements within industries that are beyond performative. And yeah, have you come across anything that really works to create that meaningful and intentional kind of movement?
I think like we were speaking about, like the building community around the aspects that we're all enjoying and cross enjoying. That's part of it, as well as meaningful change really comes from actions following up from words, or even no words at all and just actions coming through and boots on the ground, being there, holding space, being a person that a young person or somebody in the community can speak to about an issue, like a safe place to land for mental health issues or struggling with anything of the sort. Like the action, the follow through, the non-performative nature comes when people are genuinely interested in the action and the outcome from that positive action. So yeah, I think that's why groups like ours are so important, like Special Bird Service, and the space it holds in the community is because it's a social vehicle, it's a container for really like generational knowledge transfers to occur, because we're providing a space where Jamison can meet somebody like Fraser and learn something like that from Fraser, or we're providing a space where we can learn from Papakia the names of birds in Senjathan, and a lot of the bird names in Senjathan are directly related to the sound that the bird makes, and there's something very special about being able to call out to that bird in its traditional name. And my skin is like raising talking about it right now, because the birds actually recognize that this is their name locally, and they tweet back or like make a sound back towards you, and it's really special. All of this ties into the fact that Indigenous cultures and cultures centering women predominantly have lived in harmony with the land and in non-extractive ways for centuries, since time immemorial. And so I think what we're talking about across the wedding industry, across the outdoors, is listening, showing up, following through on your actions, and taking the needs of the community that you're asking to help or to be a part of or to generate a relationship with, what their needs are, and meet those actual needs instead of coming with a preconception of what people need or what could help people. Or it comes down to being respectful of other people and differences, and being able to update your opinion with new information as it comes.
Yeah, that's like, to me, that's accountability, what you're talking about right there, like being accountable to the things that are being asked of you. And also accountability looks like proactiveness. Like in the wedding like industry specifically, I think it's important to talk about what industries have been built for, which is like extractive in their nature. Like, that's one of the like trickle downs of colonization that we can feel so disconnected from in this culture. But I think when we've learned about the history that is all around us, we learn about what like the word industry actually like upholds, right? Which is being extractive. So in like wedding practices specifically, like if there's somewhere that you want to go for like a wedding, or like, it's really important to understand whose territory are you actually on? Who are the Indigenous people that have been and continue to care for those lands that you're committing to another person, other people on, and that's like we talk about like meaningful accountability and relationship building. Like just instead of walking in and to Cancun and getting married and then hopping out, like actually, well, should you be getting married in Cancun? I don't know. I'm not the guy to say that. But if you're coming to these lands or any lands, like do that research ahead of time. Like be proactive about your accountability of where you're going to actually get married, and reach out to folks if that's something, like follow protocol. Like there's protocols for every territory that we are going to step on, and learning about that protocol has been a huge area of learning for us too. And it's ongoing, right? Like you say, it's ongoing accountability.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned how we're experts earlier, like legitimately no expertise. The only thing that I know can say for sure that both of us are experts in is knowing other experts and being able to learn from those experts. So that's truly what it comes down to.
I mean, that's such an awesome outlook. Although I will test you on some bird knowledge later, and we'll see if you're experts. We'll see.
The curtain's coming down. Oh no!
We don't know birds.
But yeah, before we test your bird knowledge, anecdotally, Chrisanne, I think ceremonies I've seen more and more often start with a territorial acknowledgement, start with a recognition of this place and the connection to this land. It doesn't happen all the time, but anecdotally, I've seen it happen more often than I did 10 years ago. Do you see that in being a wedding officiant? Do you see that more often?
Well, yes, I see it because I do it.
Okay.
Working with Young, Hip, and Married has been it's been something that I wanted to do for myself and my own reasons, but working with Young, Hip, and Married, it actually has become a thing that all the officiants do, are not required to do it, but we all do it. And so it's something automatically I'm able to provide for my couples within their script. And I'm like, this is the territory acknowledgement. I even do the research of where they're getting married and what the traditional land is, what the names are. And I kind of do that homework for them, and I send it off to them. And more often than not, people are really fine with having that there. I've had some couples that are, like, one couple burst into tears on a Zoom call because they were so grateful that was a thing, because they came from overseas and they're like, this is so meaningful to us to be visiting this land and to be doing this. But on the other side of that, I've also had couples that delete it from the script or would prefer to acknowledge the territories in their own way, which is interesting. And but it is always going to be something that I do provide, encourage, and have educated people about often. And I think it is important. And again, but then also again, like, working with couples, and I mean, I work with them for sometimes years, so it's a natural flow of something that, in the beginning they might not have been open to it, but then as I explain things further, and there's some growth that happens there, which is really unique. So I think at a bare minimum, I think it is something that we need to do. But then also, how does that permeate throughout just not the ceremony, but the rest of the wedding, I think is a lot of what we're talking about here, and realizing the importance of ceremony and how, we've only realized the importance of ceremony. I think we've been reminded, I should say, of the importance of ceremony since COVID, and that ceremony has, we've moved up the ladder a bit. And so really, that's why I'm always talking about what is the heart, what is the intention, and what is the responsibility going from there.
Very cool. If I add something to that,
Yeah.
I really like what you say about letting it permeate throughout the whole ceremony, because I think like that's one of our key learnings recently is like, we would start our walks with the territory acknowledgement from us, who are, like two people of color born on stolen lands. And, like our class privilege, I think, is something that I'm like really reflecting on, and what we have been kept from knowing on these lands. And like when we talk about that accountability too, if we're having a ceremony on Indigenous lands, like not only are we just doing an acknowledgement, but what I've learned from Indigenous folks on these lands is that like a territory acknowledgement is a commitment. And so when you're making that commitment, like we're trying to make that commitment to actually like pay folks of the land to not only be in the space and welcome us to their lands if they're willing to, but also pay them, because they're giving up a lot and they're sharing a lot, and so not only are we like saying it, but we're actually paying them to welcome us to their lands and making sure that they're in a safe space where we're not, perpetuating like historical and current harms, so like I feel like a cool step for the wedding industry could be like, in what way are you acknowledging the territory? Are you paying someone from the territory to welcome you to the territory, and are you making sure that your wedding space is safe for them throughout the whole ceremony?
Yeah, good. Taking it further, I like that.
Yeah. Well, and creating that safe space again, as you say, it goes throughout the whole day, creating a safe space for all your guests, creating a safe space for all your vendors, and then letting that ripple out into the community is so huge, right? Often we get fixated on one little bit of the wedding day or the little details, but thinking about that big picture is huge. It's so important. So I think that's amazing. If we can just kind of summarize this conversation and bring it full circle, can I ask you both, Trenton and Jamison, to kind of summarize for me in what ways can environmental activism also be social justice activism, and why is this so important right now? As we're facing climate change.
I just wanted to say a piece about why it's so important, I guess, or why it's really very prevalent right now. This stat comes from the United States, but Canada in many ways is a microcosm of the U.S. And people of color in the U.S. are 3 times more likely to live in an area described as nature deprived. So we're talking about the intersectionality of this all, summarizing it: social justice and economic justice, eco justice. There's no one without the other. They're inextricably linked, like we talked about, for the many different reasons, but achieving one can't happen without the other, and those two can't be achieved without equality in general and equity in general. And it's never going to be a perfect 100% scenario, but there's so many things across all of those aspects that we've discussed today that can be followed through on action-wise. I'm sure Jamison can build off that.
Yeah, I'm thinking about a few different things because I feel like we're so lucky with the ease of access of information online that we can use that to our advantage when thinking about the connections between environmental activism and social justice. There's also another point that I wanted to make about. Oh yeah, one of the key learnings that I've had actually from Indigenous land defenders is that systems of oppression thrive on land being land theft specifically. So, land back as not only a concept that's been brought up, but in your actual wedding practices and in social justice, it's really important to understand whose land is it traditionally. And so we're walking the talk of land back, of course, from a wider view. Land back means literally giving land back to Indigenous folks. And when you're on the land of and in ceremony, like we talked about, I think that's a really key piece that I want people to take away from today.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Can I ask you what your favorite bird fact is? That's a real pivot, but
I got ADHD, so I'm with
we're
you.
just going with it. Yeah.
Wherever we go, I'm riding. I'm riding. Favorite bird fact.
Yeah.
I heard one yesterday, or the day before actually, at Quatsetch Park, Glencoe Bay in Saanich there, and this lady told me, and I didn't know this, so I was instructed by somebody, an elderly woman who I'd never met before, said that if you get too close to great blue herons, they defecate a 15-foot stream of fecal matter. So stay far away from great blue herons.
Wow.
They've also been known, right? They've also been known to kill human beings before. Their beaks are so sharp that there's been recorded cases of great blue herons killing humans. So
they're one of the only birds that don't get banded for that reason, actually. Yeah, when they do bird counts to track migrational patterns, they a lot of times they'll safely band the bird's ankles.
Yeah.
And the great blue heron is one of the only birds that doesn't get banded for that reason, because you can't really mess with them.
No.
Didn't expect that answer.
I did not expect that, but this is very good to know.
Yeah.
I often get an establishing shot at a wedding that it involves a great blue heron. I'm going to stay well away. Yeah.
They're off in the distance.
Yes, they'll be well off in the distance.
There's also a type of bird called crested auklets, and their range sort of differs, but they're close usually to Antarctic or that sort of region, southern hemisphere. They have this very strong citrus smell that helps them attract mates. So the men essentially are very stinky boys and have this zesty citrus stench that attracts a mate. They look very, very odd. They have sort of an orange beak, this kind of turkey esque skin growth on and that's their crest, and that's why they're the crested auklets. And they're just very odd birds that make a lot of noise and stink up the place.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So just like there's various types of humans and a whole wide array of humans, there's a whole wide array of birds as well.
That's amazing.
SBS, aka the zesty, stinky boys.
Well, I don't really know how to pivot back, so I'm just going to do it quickly. So if you had one piece of advice for maybe a wedding vendor or maybe a wedding couple who is working to make this industry better, more sustainable, more diverse, more inclusive, looking at the industry through an intersectional lens, there's a lot to unpack there. But if you had one piece of advice, what would that be? And maybe I'll start with you, Chrisanne.
I would probably say check your privilege to do with all of this, and that having to do with your access to things and your right to these experiences. And again, just putting yourself in a posture of humility and knowing that folks around the world are in different situations than you, and then going beyond that and figuring out how you can help. But I would just say checking your privilege, and not in a judgmental way, but genuinely checking your privilege, because there's definitely going to be a lot of different things to consider around the weddings and how that ties into environmentalism and then social justice. So a lot of privilege to possibly unpack. And I would say, please do the work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the work's there for all of us. Mm-hmm. You're so right. I love that you say that.
Yeah.
Trenton, if you had one piece of advice, what would that be?
As a lawyer, I tend to stay away from giving advice, if I'm honest with you. I'm going to give a suggestion because I don't think I'm in any position to tell other people how to live their life. My suggestion would be to try and expand your horizon, try and expand your point of view. Don't exist in an echo chamber. Try and listen to other points of view, other types of people from different backgrounds or different demographics that have a different way of doing things. Jamison spoke of Tiffany Joseph earlier, and Tiffany shared with us about how when colonizers came to southern Vancouver Island here, or what's colonially known as southern Vancouver Island, the Wasanic people were fishing with these incredible nets that had a hole in the center of the net. And their fishing practices using these nets were outlawed because of the high efficiency of the amount of salmon they caught with these nets. And Tiffany explained how colonizers couldn't understand why there was a hole in the net. And so they outlawed that type of fishing because it was so effective. And why there was a hole in the center was because the salmon who really needed to get out, who didn't need to be harvested at that time, got out at that period. There was like a faucet left open, if you will, of salmon still being able to leave that net and exist, go on to create and leave more salmon for generations to come. And, that's something that's expanded my horizon recently. And so I think that ties back into what we're talking about a suggestion would be to keep your mind open, and when presented with new information, update your opinion. And there's no shame in being wrong. And as long as you learn from it and update how you feel or your actions based on that, there's no shame in being wrong. It happens all the time to really intelligent people and across the board. And so, that would be my suggestion.
Amazing.
Yeah, I love that. One of the members of the Musqueam Indian band, Rhiannon Bennett is her name. She recently told me, she was like, we all got to move away from, don't be afraid to make a mistake, and move towards, don't be afraid to fix a mistake, because that's what takes courage, and that's what takes accountability. And I think that really touches on what you're saying as well. And yeah, I think if there's that's one thing that I would love you all to know. I feel like I'm saying that all the time these days, but it's hit with me in a big way. I think questioning what it is that you're trying to do when you're getting married, I guess. I mean, that's a big question, but where you actually are. Are you going to be extractive in that, process? Are you going to just celebrate your marriage on someone else's territory and then move forward and come back home? I think it really ties in with one of my key learnings, I think, over the pandemic, in conversation with folks at SBS specifically, and realizing the entitlement that I have to travel, to going places, and not being a responsible tourist, going to somewhere that I don't speak the language, expecting them sorry, I hit my mic. Expecting them to speak the language that I speak in their own land, you know? And I think like it's really easy to have that entitlement and like quite like you say, like check your privilege. Like I think that ties in with that big time. Like from what area are you coming into this ceremony? Are you coming in because you want something from it? Or are you willing for the ceremony to actually like bring you something and actually make it a meaningful thing?
I feel like that's a really cool way to look at marriage too, or to look at a wedding ceremony. It's not just something that happens or you get something from it, but something that you actually have to put work into, right? So, yeah. Well, I want to thank you all for being here for this conversation. This was so incredible. Just so cool to talk with you all, to learn about what you're doing, and to learn about great blue herons.
Stay away.
Stay away. Stay away.
Unless you want to be one of those stinky boys.
So misunderstood.
Exactly. Or girls, or any other non-binary.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I don't think we can find a better end for an episode than that.
I just wanted to pass on thank you very much, Chrisanne, for sharing your point of view and where you're at with it. And Bryan, thank you very much for hosting. I really appreciate that. And Chelsea, and I'm sorry I've forgotten your name. Jimmy. Yeah, Jimmy, thank you both as well. I appreciate it.
Yeah, and being invited into tables where we're all at the table and sitting, and also naming who's not at the table like we did today, which I think is also really important. But
Yeah.
being invited into these kind of conversations is really sweet. I see it to be a huge way forward, and I mean I think I'm so far away from getting married, so this is I don't even know.
Don't tell Dad.
So like to incorporate like this conversation into the wedding industry too is, I guess, has me thinking.
Well, call us when you are. Just kidding. But
Just kidding.
well,